Something exploded at Qeshm Island overnight, and nobody officially told you who pulled the trigger. Sit with that for a second. Shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been largely blocked since February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes under Operation Epic Fury, targeting Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed, and Iran did not sit quietly. It swung back hard, mined a global choke point, and now the world is watching a 34-kilometer stretch of water that controls the economic fate of billions of people. This is Verified Bulletin. Stay till the end because there is a number buried inside today's story that most outlets are not even mentioning, and that number changes the entire picture of where this goes next. On Monday, the UAE Defense Ministry confirmed its air defenses had engaged 15 missiles and 4 drones fired by Iran. A drone struck a key oil facility in Fujairah, wounding 3 Indian nationals and triggering the first missile alerts since the ceasefire began nearly a month ago. Commercial aircraft bound for Dubai and Abu Dhabi turned around mid-air. Schools across the Gulf had already shifted to online learning when the war began in late February. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. This is daily life in 2026 in one of the most economically critical regions on Earth. Stop for a moment and think about what that actually means. A world-class aviation hub, hundreds of aircraft, rerouted, mid-flight. Now stack that image against what Washington is still officially calling a ceasefire. The U.S. and Iran opened fire in the Strait of Hormuz, with each side claiming the other initiated the attack. U.S. Central Command stated its forces intercepted what it described as unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes. Iran accused the U.S. of violating the ceasefire by targeting an Iranian tanker moving from Iranian coastal waters toward the strait. Trump called those strikes a love tap. That is an exact quote, a love tap. On a tanker, in an international waterway, with destroyers and missiles involved. If your definition of ceasefire includes active missile exchanges, sinking boats, and air defense intercepts, then yes, the ceasefire is holding perfectly. This is the first thing you need to understand about what is unfolding at Hormuz right now. Words in this conflict do not mean what words normally mean. Ceasefire does not mean no fire. Open strait does not mean ships are moving. War without being called a war has been the operating framework since late February. Fox News chief national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, citing a senior U.S. official, confirmed that the U.S. military conducted strikes on Qeshm Port and Bandar Abbas, but stressed the operation does not signal a return to full-scale conflict or the end of the ceasefire arrangement. Not a restart of the war, just strikes. On ports, inside another country, during a ceasefire. You are watching language being weaponized in real time, and if you are only reading headlines, you are only getting half the story. Subscribe to Verified Bulletin right now if you want analysis that goes deeper than the surface. And if this video is already doing that for you, hit like. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need this information. Now, according to reports from Iran's state media, multiple explosions were heard at the Bahman Pier in Qeshm Island during what Iranian sources described as an exchange of fire between Iranian armed forces and enemy forces, with additional blasts reported near Bandar Abbas. Local outlet reports confirmed 6 explosions in Sirak in Hormozgan province at intervals of roughly 40 seconds, with explosions also heard in Minab, Bandar Kamir, and other coastal towns. This was not a single incident. This was coordinated, systematic, spread across a coastline. Qeshm Island is not a random target. Bandar Abbas is not a random target. These are 2 of the most strategically sensitive maritime control points Iran holds over the strait. Whoever was behind those explosions knew exactly what they were hitting and exactly why. Israel issued a rapid denial. The UAE was mentioned in separate reports. Washington described it as limited and non-escalatory. When three different actors are issuing statements about the same overnight strikes, you know the situation is more layered than any single narrative can capture. Now here is where the story pivots from military drama into something that touches every single person watching this video. The two unidirectional sea lanes in the Strait of Hormuz facilitate the transit of around 20 million barrels of oil per day, representing roughly 20% of global seaborne oil trade. 20 million barrels, every single day. Through a corridor where destroyers are firing at tankers and mines are sitting on the ocean floor. Around 230 loaded oil tankers are currently waiting inside the Gulf, unable to move. 230 ships, loaded with crude oil, sitting, waiting, because no one can guarantee safe passage through 34 kilometers of contested water. Think about the supply chain math on that. Every day those tankers sit still, downstream industries get tighter. Refineries draw down reserves. Fuel distributors price in risk. Airlines pre-buy at whatever rate they can lock in. Manufacturers factor rising logistics costs into their next product cycle. And 6 weeks from now, that calculation lands on a shelf near you with a new price tag on it. That transmission mechanism is not speculation. It is mechanical. It has operated the same way in every major energy disruption since 1973. South Korea, which imported more than 60% of its crude through the strait last year, has already capped prices of gasoline and other petroleum products. Seoul moved fast because Seoul did the math fast. When a country that imports 60% of its oil through one choke point sees that choke point go into active military contestation, it does not wait for international negotiations to conclude before acting domestically. It acts now. What country have you seen take similar action where you live? That question is worth sitting with. Satellite images reviewed by the Associated Press show what appears to be an oil slick in the Persian Gulf emanating from the western side of Qeshm Island, Iran's main crude export terminal. Images show the slit covering approximately 71 square kilometers, appearing to show oil still leaking, with analysts estimating the equivalent of roughly 80,000 oil barrels has spilled since the slick was first detected. 80,000 barrels, spilling, slowly, into the Persian Gulf, on top of a mining campaign, on top of drone strikes on tankers, on top of active missile exchanges between two nuclear-capable military frameworks. At some point, the word crisis stops being sufficient. Now pull back and look at the strategic architecture, because this is where the story inside the story lives. Washington launched what it called Project Freedom, a U.S. operation to support merchant vessels seeking to freely transit the strait, involving guided missile destroyers, over 100 land and sea-based aircraft, multi-domain unmanned platforms, and 15,000 service members. That is not a small gesture. 15,000 service members, over 100 aircraft, deployed specifically to move commercial ships through 34 kilometers of water. U.S. Central Command Admiral Brad Cooper told reporters that American forces successfully opened a passage through the strait free of Iranian mines, and that Iran launched multiple cruise missiles, drones, and small boats at civilian ships under U.S. military protection. U.S. military helicopters sank 6 of the Iranian small boats. Then Trump paused Project Freedom. On May 6th, Trump paused the operation because of what he described as great progress toward a possible agreement. 3 days after launching a 15,000-person military operation to force open a global waterway, it was paused for talks, while missiles were still flying. That sequence alone tells you something fundamental about the pressure both sides are operating under. Nobody at this table actually wants full escalation. But nobody is willing to be the first to fully stand down either. So you get a war that is not a war, a ceasefire with fire, an open strait that is not open, and a pause in a military operation that had only just begun. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are being mediated by Pakistan, and issues under discussion include freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear and ballistic program, reconstruction, sanctions, and a long-term peace agreement. Pakistan as mediator. China hosting Iran's foreign minister in Beijing. Trump calling strikes love taps. Every actor in this theater is managing optics as aggressively as they are managing military positioning.
Because whoever blinks first in negotiations hands the other side structural leverage for the next decade. Drop a comment below. What do you think happens next? Does Washington push harder on Project Freedom, or does a deal get done before the next escalation threshold is crossed? Verified Bulletin reads every comment, and your analysis matters to this community. Now here is the piece of this puzzle that almost no mainstream outlet has properly priced into their coverage yet. On April 17th, when Iran's foreign minister briefly announced the strait was open to all shipping traffic, oil prices dropped sharply, losing 11% in the immediate aftermath of the announcement. 11% in hours, simply from an announcement. Markets moved faster than ships did. Because markets do not wait for verified transit confirmation, they price on signal. And that 11% drop tells you exactly how much geopolitical risk premium was sitting inside every barrel of crude being priced globally while this crisis was active. Although the strait was declared open, commercial traffic did not return to pre-war levels, and Trump simultaneously posted that while the strait was completely open, the U.S. naval blockade would remain until negotiations with Iran had concluded. So the strait is open and blockaded simultaneously, by different definitions held by different governments. And markets have to price crude oil in the middle of that contradiction every single trading day. That 11% swing in oil prices when a single announcement was made? Imagine the reverse. Imagine what a single exchange of fire, a single mined tanker, a single failed negotiation session in Islamabad does to that same market. The asymmetry is dramatic. Stability produces slow, gradual price normalization. Escalation produces instant, violent price spikes. And right now, the entire architecture holding this situation together is being stress-tested on a daily basis. Among the substantial costs being weighed by the Iranian state is military expenditure, its nuclear program, and the reality that the closure of Hormuz, through which many Iranian imports and exports also flow, is exacerbating Iran's own already heavily sanctioned economy. This is the part of the Iranian calculation that rarely gets enough attention in Western coverage. Tehran is not operating from a position of economic strength. High inflation, sustained sanctions pressure, and a war that has damaged its own military infrastructure mean that Iran's tolerance for prolonged confrontation has limits. Real, structural limits. The mining of Hormuz, the drone strikes, the missile barrages, these are not signs of a military that is comfortable in a long-horizon war. They are the actions of a state trying to extract maximum leverage from a deteriorating position before a negotiated framework closes the door on that leverage permanently. U.S. President Donald Trump has insisted the ceasefire is holding, while reiterating threats to resume full-scale bombing if Iran does not accept an agreement to reopen the strait and roll back its nuclear program. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said his country has been in contact with the U.S. and Iran day and night in an effort to extend the ceasefire and reach a peace deal. Day and night. That phrase from Islamabad is telling. When mediators are working around the clock, it means both sides still want a deal. It also means the deal is not close enough to announce, and in that gap between wanting a deal and having one, military commanders on both sides retain operational authority. Destroyers intercept missiles, small boats get sunk, ports get struck. And the ceasefire survives by the thinnest possible diplomatic margin. Iran has created a new agency called the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, which is reported to vet and tax ships seeking passage through the strait.
U.S. Secretary of State Rubio described this as unacceptable, asking whether the world was prepared to accept that Iran now controls an international waterway. That agency is a declaration, not a military declaration, a bureaucratic one. Iran is attempting to formalize what it is currently doing by force into a permanent institutional structure. If that agency exists and operates, it does not disappear when the guns go quiet. It becomes a leverage point in every future negotiation about transit rights, tariffs, and regional security architecture for years to come. That is the long game. And that is why Washington is not treating this as a local skirmish. The 34-kilometer strait is not the end of the story. It is the negotiating table. 230 tankers are still waiting.
15,000 U.S. service members are still deployed. Pakistan is still mediating around the clock. And somewhere in Beijing, conversations about energy security and strategic alignment are happening behind closed doors that none of us have full visibility into. So here is the question Verified Bulletin is posing today. Not who fired first, not whose missile hit what ship. The real question is this: when the deal finally gets made, and some form of deal will get made because the economic cost of this impasse is unsustainable for everyone involved, who walks away with structural leverage and who walks away having given more than they got? That answer will shape energy markets, nuclear non-proliferation frameworks, and Gulf security architecture for the next generation. This story is not finished, not even close. If Verified Bulletin is giving you the layer of analysis you are not finding anywhere else, subscribe right now. Every new subscriber genuinely helps this channel grow and reach people who want real, verified, fact-grounded coverage of the stories that actually move the world. Hit like on this video if you want to see more analysis at this depth. Drop your take in the comments below, and we will see you in the next one when this situation moves again. Because it will move again. Probably before tomorrow.